disbursed any money for social safety nets for people living in the ghettos in our township. In papers that were filed before the court, the Ministry of National Social Security confessed that we have only disbursed 90 million Zimbabwean dollars, which is $9 million, to the relevant ministry. How much money have you actually disbursed to the relevant ministry led by Professor Mazuna? Thank you.
Minister of Public Service and Social Welfare, as to what is the government's policy position when it comes to distribution of food, especially maize, in drought-stricken areas, whereby the delivery does not meet the quantum of the registered beneficiaries. How, and at the end of the day, there is now cherry picking of those who then receive the maize. What is the government's policy position in situations like that? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The distribution of food to food insecure households Madam Speaker, the distribution of food to food insecure households works in cycles. Typically after the harvest around April, May, we scale down because most households will have gotten something from their own house. The distribution of food to food insecure households Madam Speaker, the distribution of food to food insecure households works in cycles. Typically after the harvest around April, May, we scale down because most households will have gotten something from their own house. In October, our distribution will be very limited to those households. And then we start picking up as more and more households will have exhausted whatever harvest they will have gotten. And this is where we are now. We are beginning to pick up. And a lot of the honorable members would have realized that currently we have started distributing mealie meal in rural areas. And that's because some of the maize that we had was GMO maize. And we don't allow GMO maize to be distributed without being milled. So we are of areas that were most affected by the drought. We will continue to upscale, and the highest number that we will feed will start around January, which is the peak hunger period. So the reason why some areas may not have received is because those areas had better harvest than others.
That's not the question.
Madam Speaker, that's the situation. And we'll pick up the distribution going into November, December.
That's not the question.
Thank you.
So, as social welfare, maybe 1,500 people are registered in that ward, and only 200 bags come. What is the policy position as to how that maize should be distributed among the 1,500 people when only 200 bags come? Are the people charged with that allowed to break those bags and share equal amongst all the beneficiaries, because they've all been certified to be vulnerable? What is the policy position? Because at the end of the day, they will be cherry picking of individuals among that whole lot.
Of vulnerability, and then allocates on the basis of that. They start with more vulnerable people, that, you know, especially those that cannot fend for themselves. The child-headed households, the elderly people. The assumption really is that during the month, we may have brought 200 in the first instance, but as the month progresses, as more grain comes, then the other people are covered. We don't typically allow for the supplies to be broken. Very vulnerable, becomes susceptible to hunger. So the best way to do this is to rank on the basis of vulnerability, and this is how social welfare distributes the supplies, if they are limited. And like I said, we are beginning to scale up to where every vulnerable household should be receiving grains in the rural areas. We hope that situation where there is limited stock will be a thing of the past very soon. Thank you. Very vulnerable, becomes susceptible to hunger. So the best way to do this is to rank on the basis of vulnerability, and this is how social welfare distributes the supplies, if they are limited. And like I said, we are beginning to scale up to where every vulnerable household should be receiving grains in the rural areas. We hope that situation where there is limited stock will be a thing of the past very soon. Thank you.
What is your standard of assessing vulnerability of families? As Honorable Musapa has indicated that many families in rural areas are all vulnerable. If you go to rural areas, like for example, he said in his ward or constituency, of the 200 you have selected, same people with the same vulnerability are also in demand of food. So why don't you put a formula where the food available is shared among the vulnerable families? That is
for us to indicate, how we judge vulnerability. It's highly commonsensical. There are those families that are permanently on social welfare rolls, and these are families like the ones for the elderly citizens who are no longer able to work for themselves. And then there are those who are chronically ill, suffering from various diseases, who cannot, again, fend for themselves. Then there are, but we have instances where, for various reasons, families become food insecure. Cyclone Idai, for example, the 2 successive droughts that we have had render some families that are capable of working for themselves food insecure. In such situations, then we increase our roles. But what we have said is, for those who can work, when we have enough grain, we give them, but they have to work for it. Hence, food for work, child-headed households. And we would like, as much as possible, to maintain the standard of 50 kgs per household, because then that will sustain them for a whole month. The other transitory food insecure households have ways in which they can cope. Because they are able-bodied, they can work, especially where we have limited stock, then we cannot take care of them. We'll have to limit to those food insecure. And like I said, in situations where we have, say, 300 food insecure headed households, and we would like as much as possible to maintain the standard of 50 kgs per household, because then that will sustain them for a whole month. The other transitory food insecure households have ways in which they can cope. Because they are able-bodied, they can work, especially where we have limited stock, then we cannot take care of them. We'll have to limit to those food insecure. And like I said, in situations where we have, say, 300 food insecure, 100, so that this is why, for example, every week we are reporting that we have distributed so much. And then we get to the month end and we do the tallies to see if a district or a province has received enough to cover everyone who is vulnerable in the manner that I have referred to. This is what we have been doing. Are we in an ideal situation at the moment? No. This is why Cabinet has formed a grain mobilization interministerial committee, which is aggressively trying to get additional grain resources into the country. Thank you very much.
Child marriage, and to make sure that the girls who are pregnant, who got pregnant during the lockdown, are able to go back to school.
Pregnant during lockdown? Are pregnant. Went pregnant, and we are working with the Ministry of Education, and we have formed child support committees of women, mothers, that are supporting such girls, and we are encouraging them to go back to school. And indeed, some of them will have their uniforms now not fitting because they are bigger than when before COVID, because of pregnancy. And we are talking to schools so that they are allowed to go in their own clothes. But the important thing is that the whole community, in the ministry, we have got a program that says bridging a generational and a digital gap, in which we are pairing young women and experienced retired women to try and make sure that they mentor the young women. So, but in terms of gender equality, we also cannot have gender equality unless you strengthen and ensure that the young woman takes up her position. The men will not give her the position. So, in trying to mentor the young women,
the substantive question which I want to make a follow-up on is that we have a situation where girls have already entered into marriage when they are below the age of 18. And in view of the fact that the provisions which relate to penalties or sanctions which can be meted out to those who have been responsible for placing them in that situation are not yet in place. My question to the Honourable Minister is what measures have been put in place to assist girls who find themselves in such a situation?
Traditional leaders, because that's where the girls, especially in rural areas, are coming from. If traditional leaders, yes, if traditional leaders are sympathetic and they understand that young girls need to be protected, they usually also educate the community so that together they take corrective measures in support of the girls. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
ari kusevenzesa yandingati kuti implied exchange rate yakasiyana neinenge iri kuma-option kwedu. Tine komiti yatakaisa nemapurisa, ma-stakeholders vakafanana neveconsumer council of Zimbabwe, business community. Kutanga kunana next week tiri kuita program yokuti vanhu vano identify vese vane ma-exchange rate akasiyana neyeku-auction.
Pari zvino vanhu vazhinji vari munyika muno vari kuti vakapinda muna spa une rate rake, vakapinda muna OK une rate rake, uyu une mutengo wake, uyu une mutengo wake, Mr. Speaker. Saka ivo seministry vangaregera here zvinhu izvozvo chingoitika vachiti tichada kuzoti nekuti zvaane nguva, Mr. Speaker. Mazvita Mr. Speaker. Mazvita Mr. Speaker. Ndanga ndiri kuti minister taunzwa kuti urongwa vakaenda zvemurodhi, vari murodhi vane rate yavo, ari pamotomoto ane rate yake, ari kuspa une rate yake, uri parodport ane rate yake, ane mutengo wake. Tikatarisa Mr. Speaker, dare rino rabvunzazve nenyaya yemutemo weblack market. Ndiri kuona sekunge Mr. Speaker, ministry ine zvimwe zvinhu zvairi kuita zvisina kujekera nyika, kuti ari kumbosakisa kuti mari dzakachena dzinge dziri parodport ambori ani. So takupedzisira takufungidzira kuti kude iyo ministrywo ine zvairi kuwana mukati mezvinhu izvozvo.
Varidzi vemashopu makuru mamwe tanga tichitaura navo zvekuti vanouya totaura navo kuti muri kukanganisa mutemo yenyika. Pane zvimwe zvitoro zviviri zvavataura izvi, ndofunga pane zviviri zvamataura mukainda munogona kuona kuti vari kusenzesa reti chaiyo chaiyo. Asi iyo spa yamataura iyi, spa ine reti yayo. Asi OK neimwe yamambotanga kutaura vane reti yehurumende inenge ichibva kuauction. Vokuroad nemawandiro avakaita, kazhinji vekuroad vanosevenzesa reti yavanenge vawana kumashopu makuru. Kana mashopu makuru akangotevedzera mutemo wenyika, vekuroad vanotevedzera. Saka tose muno chikumbiro chandikangopa kuma MP ose nevese vari munyika, vanhu vese vari kuita zveblack market ava vanhu vatinogara navo. Saka kana manhamba edu tamanyora, ngatindoudza vanhu vekwatinobva varipoti. Saka isisu ticharamba tichienda mberi neprogramu yandataura iya. Saka sokudavira kwandaita mubvunzo waona rebho ndofunga unongodairwa saizvozvo kuti tinogona kutoenda naikoko, asi kutanga vhiki inouya ndopamuchaona taapaground.
Why does it make sense that when you go into a shop, they are using an exchange rate so that they can give you a receipt in RTG, and yet this particular government is desperate for foreign currency? Why can't they make it a law that when you pay in US dollars, your receipt is in US dollars, so that when they are charged the tax, they are charged the tax in US dollars? So we don't understand why we are even having this debate around the exchange. When we should just be getting the people in the shops to record my money in US dollars, because I give them hard cash. Why are they operating like their banks?
Supposed to remit the revenue in the currency of trade, which then means if they trade in US dollars, they are supposed to issue a receipt that is in US dollars. But when we were doing our research, what we discovered is the big shops are having a systems problem. They engaged Zimra, and all of them were given up to this Friday, meaning to say that from next week Monday, they are supposed to be compliant. So that if one buys in US dollars, they are supposed to be given a receipt, supposed to remit the revenue in the currency of trade. which then means if they trade in US dollars, they are supposed to issue a receipt that is in US dollars. But when we were doing our research, what we discovered is the big shops are having a systems problem. They engaged Zimra, and all of them were given up to this Friday, meaning to say that from next week Monday, they are supposed to be compliant. So that if one buys in US dollars, they are supposed to be given a receipt.
Emanates from the response that the minister said when he was asked. He said that has set a committee to ensure that there is compliance. Now, I wanted the minister to advise us in this house, given the performance of the auction system that we have witnessed, that a major chunk of the people that are applying for foreign currency on the auction system are failing to get that money. Very few are getting, I think it's a smaller percentage. Would there be justification to then set a committee to supervise the bulk of the people that are failing to access it?
The majority are actually getting the money. We can check the statistics. The statistics are clearly showing that the majority are getting the funds. And the allocation of funds are allocated according to the bid price which you submit. Those who participate in the market, they are not allocated funds according to the weighted auction rate. You are allocated funds according to your bid rate. If you bid at 1:100, and then if your line of business is in the priority areas, you also get priority.
Which is US dollar, is no longer acceptable now. There's a 7%. They want cash. So when you want to make a payment through the Nostro account, bank to bank in US dollars, they're refusing. There is now a 7% which they now give you to go and withdraw the money. They want cash. Today, the question is, how can we sustain or run an economy when all the monetary policies that we have had don't work, and you still stand up in boldness and try to convince us, when even the Honorable Speaker says people are suffering every day? They were not. Why did they embark on this when their framework was not in order? Because they're saying we are going to put a framework in.
But that does not make it legal. It's illegal. And in terms of the US dollar, I think what is important is also for us to check what is happening in the market. We are having a lot of people who are having a lot of US dollar balances. And they are trying to get the RTGS balances. The most popular currency at the moment as we speak is the RTGS. You need to go to the market and find out what is happening. The monetary policy, which has been mentioned, we have actually done our monetary policy excellently.
Primary and secondary education. Honorable Speaker, as we speak, students writing O-level and A-level examinations went back to school on Monday, but teachers did not go back to school. In his post-cabinet briefing yesterday, the minister said teachers who are on strike will be replaced by 10,000 qualified teachers who are not yet employed. Is it government policy not to address labor issues by substituting them with teachers who are unemployed, and is that sustainable?
Out there unemployed was with regard to the fact that we want our learners to go to school. We want our children to go to school. And we'll do everything we can to make sure that learners go to school. But in any case, Mr. Speaker said, in any case, Mr. Speaker said, the issue is that the matter is being handled by my honorable colleague with regard to the challenges that we're facing because of some of the teachers who have decided not to go to work. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
who does have them will be considered. If on the grounds of the numbers, we are talking of the numbers, assuming 200 people have enrolled for an engineering degree and only 180 can be taken, then the 20 can be considered for their second option. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, Innovation, Science and Technology Development is addressing skills gaps in this country so that we move towards modernization and industrialization of the nation of Zimbabwe. So the sister ministry of primary and secondary education, I think, is the one that should address the question that has been asked of what is to be done at that level so as to increase the preparedness of the students who will take up higher and tertiary education. I hope I've answered the question. Thank you.
Of our children in the Matabeleland region who take science subjects. As a ministry, Mr. Speaker said, we aim to make sure that all children in this country access the same level, the same subject areas of schools. That is why we want to see, even in those regions where we have a shortage or a small number of children who do science, we have the necessary number of teachers as well